Yeah, it was great to see Ty back up here this morning. So thanks for bringing that announcement. And I want to say about the announcement, Markel and Brittany have no idea how blessed they're going to be by coming to be part of this community. It has been just such a joy and a delight for Karin and I to get to know you all. And you're going to just be such a gift to them. I know you think it's here for your benefit that they're coming, but really it's going to be just such a great thing for them. And I'm excited for them. A little sad for me personally, I'll say that. But I'm only a little bit sad for two reasons. One, because, and I was talking with Joe about this before the service, but if you looked at the timeline for me being in this role, I still have almost half the time that I've been here still yet ahead before they get here. So I'm planning to lean into the finish line here. So we've got a ways to go there. And also, honestly, Karin and I really genuinely have just come to love this congregation. And we'd love to find a way to stick around in unofficial capacity if we can. So we do have to eat, so we'll see what the Lord does and where he takes us next. But I'll be working closely with Markel on the transition to make it as seamless as we can. And you guys are kind of getting to be pros at transition around here. And yes, it's growing, it's exciting. And I think in the midst of change, because really they say that every pastor is an interim pastor, because generally speaking, congregations last longer than the term of a pastor. And so it's just good to be reconnecting with this series that we are right now and stay connected to what is constant no matter what is happening, that there are certain things that we can just find are part of grounding for us. So I'm excited to be back in this series with you this morning. Back in the 70s, there was a movie called The Poseidon Adventure that was all about this cruise ship that had a disaster and capsized, completely turned upside down. And you can imagine the panic with all the passengers trying to get out, trying to figure out what they're going to do. And so they're all headed towards the deck, which is now the very bottom of the ship, except for Gene Hackman, who happens to be a pastor in this story. But that aside, he has this sort of counterintuitive idea that really, because up is down and down is up, now what they really need to do is climb up into the hull, and that's going to be the way that seems wrong to everybody else, but going this opposite direction proves to be actually the way to rescue. And I think the moral of the story is always listen to your pastor. Although he had some kind of wacky theology in that movie, so that's not always the case. But this idea of the church and the kingdom of God flipping things upside down so often from what looks like success in the world, it's just not the way the church operates. And we're going to look at some of that today and what is different about it. And I want to start with our text that comes out of 2 Corinthians chapter 4 today. And so let's take a look at what Paul writes here. He says, but we have this treasure being what we started to look at last week a little bit, that the mystery of Christ in you, the hope of glory. That's the treasure, the gospel, this idea that we have the very Spirit of God living inside of us. What an amazing treasure to have his presence with us to transform us. But he says we have this treasure in jars of clay. When he says that phrase, jars of clay, what what does that signify or mean to you? What does it mean that we're jars of clay? Anybody? Fragile. Shapeable. I like that idea. Poured into. Dirt. Yeah. I mean, clay is not as expensive or fancy as maybe a gold jar, you know. It's maybe also a little rougher, you know. Maybe it's not as polished. Yeah, so that idea, this sort of opposite thinking, again, down being up, that God would take this incredibly valuable treasure and put it inside of us when maybe we have some rough edges and we're maybe not the most worthy vessel to hold that treasure. But he says the reason for that is to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We're hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not abandoned. Struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. For we who are alive are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that his life may also be revealed in our mortal body. So then, death is at work in us, but life is at work in you. That whole idea of this treasure in jars of clay, that's the upside down thing that I want to talk with you a little bit about this morning. We've been going through the statement of identity that Anchor has adopted, that Ty quoted for us in the announcements this morning, that we're a community of imperfect Jesus followers living for the good. And we've been breaking that down, and this week we're going to just center in on that middle section there of what it means to be imperfect Jesus followers. It's kind of a really interesting thing to highlight in like a vision statement, to really zero in on that. And that can land a few different ways with us. Think, some of you may remember back in the day they used to have a bumper sticker, and I'm hoping nobody here has this on their car, but it says, Christians aren't perfect, just forgiven. You know, it's a little smug sounding, you know, little condescending and kind of dismissive, right? Like, hey, you know, nobody's perfect, but we're forgiven, you know, it's okay. And it can feel like it's not really taking the imperfection seriously. And that's not what this statement is saying. I think instead in this statement we talked last week about throwing the doors wide open to everybody. So if you are being introduced to Anchor and go, I don't know if there's a place for me there, well, it's a place full of imperfect people, right? So it's a gesture of welcome to say anybody, we don't have our act all together yet. And so it also kind of changes expectations. And, you know, I think church can often be a place where it feels like you've got to have your life together. And you look around and you see everybody else and you're going, man, everybody else seems to be doing pretty well. And so you feel like you have to kind of put on a show when you come to church. And so this kind of strips that away right from the beginning. But I do think we can have a lot of different ideas of what it means to actually be. What are we talking about when we say imperfect? So to help us out, I want to give us this morning 6 ways to be imperfect. And I've probably hit all of these this weekend. So, and if you come up with one that I left off the list, then I've done 7 ways to be imperfect. But I think this word can be used in different ways, and to me, it's helpful to kind of break it down a little bit. So first off, there can be just things that are just egregiously wrong. Sin, for example, when there is harm that is done, or there's that side of us that just knows the right thing to do but can't for whatever reason, actually do it. There's this sort of self-sabotage that happens. We just have this pull to do the wrong thing sometimes. That's one level of imperfection. Then there's the kind of imperfect that's just incorrect. We make a mistake, right? I've met you 3 times, and I still get your name wrong. I completely don't see Eric and Susan sitting in the front row, It's incorrect, but that's one kind of imperfection. Another one is when things are untended, like you're just dialing it in, and you're not doing your part. You're not doing your work. You're being lazy or sloppy around it, and it's not well cared for. But then there are 3 other kinds of imperfection. One would be limited. None of us can do absolutely everything. We're limited in terms of our energy. We're limited in terms of our time or languages we speak, or you can go on and on with that. Markel and I actually had a really great conversation talking about from both of our different perspectives our limitations around age, because I was feeling limitations from being on the older side, and he was feeling limitations about being on the younger side, and that's just part of life. We are given certain things that we can only do so much. Then there's also the imperfection of being scarred. We are going through life and we experience some battle damage. Maybe they're not even scars yet. Maybe it's still just wounds and hurts that we're carrying around, and we're no longer in pristine condition, and so our way of relating and engaging is a little more guarded. Maybe it makes us wary of things, suspicious, and so that's another kind of imperfection, I think. And then there's just things that are not finished, right? You can be at a certain maturity level and not be fully developed, and so you're not perfect in the sense of complete. It's not wrong, but it's not full yet. Or you're working on a project that you haven't finished, and so it doesn't feel like it's perfected yet. So those are 6 general categories of imperfection. To me, I look at the top 3, and I go, okay, what I want to be clear about is when we talk about being an imperfect community, it's not like we're just accepting all the imperfection. Like, if there's something egregious going on, it needs to be addressed. You don't sweep things under the rug by just saying, well, we're imperfect, and it's okay. If there is abuse that's happening, if there is harm being done, it's always going to be part of a community's life that these things are going to come up, but when we see them, we need to address them. If there's mistakes that are significant, they need to be remedied, or things. We want to make sure we're not leaving things uncared for. We're doing the work that we are called to do. If you get to this bottom group of imperfections, there are more things to be accepted. I feel like the top group is stuff that needs to be attended to. The bottom is stuff that needs to be accepted. So our limitations. We need to learn to live within our limits. We don't have unlimited budgets. We don't have unlimited capacity to do all the programs that you might want to have in a church. We have to work within the limits of who we are. And the things, our history that we've been through, that doesn't need to be forgiven or forgotten. That needs to be cared for. If you have been wounded and hurt, that needs some attention around it, but it doesn't need to be eliminated. And if we are still in process there's room for that. We're all in process, and we need to have room for each other to be in process. What I love about this bottom section is to think about Christ's own experience, because he stepped into the limitations of being in a human body. He emptied himself, we're told. He came down and took on that form, and he stayed within those boundaries. He didn't try to be everywhere all at once. He was scarred. In fact, when John paints that picture for us in Revelation, and Jesus is on the throne, he describes him as looking like a lamb who looks as if it's been slain. Meaning those scars that he bears have carried over with him into eternity. It's not something to be just forgotten. And what I also love about his incarnation is his coming to earth as a baby, and not just going straight to the cross, but having these 30 plus years. Most of those years we know nothing about, and yet he's going through childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, and there was never a stage along the way where he was outside of God's will. And what that tells me is that when I'm in process, I can so often be so in a rush to get to completion. And I think that God's only going to be happy when I'm at the end. But to go look at Jesus and go, he went through process. If he can go through process, we can go through process as well. So I think it's important to remember that distinction when we talk about imperfections. And here's the deal. The gospel itself does not hinge on us being perfect. As individuals or as a church, God is not waiting to work through us until we get our act together, right? Like this is back to the glory in the jars of clay. Like God does his thing, and of course we want to not be so full of flaws and mistakes, but the gospel keeps going out. And if we're focused on trying to be perfect all the time, that's going to make us think that this is somehow more about us than it really is. I like what Rich Villodas had to say. He said, when spiritual vitality is measured by sin avoidance, by trying to be perfect, we deceive ourselves into thinking that we are following Jesus faithfully. But following Jesus is to be measured by love for God expressed in love for neighbor. It's a different way of coming at it, and we can get so caught up in trying to be perfect. Another way to put it is, rather than just focusing on being sinless, that we focus on living like forgiven people. So the goal then is not to eliminate or excuse imperfection, because we tend to go one or the other ways. Either we're eradicating it, saying we need to get rid of this entirely, or we're dismissing it and saying imperfection doesn't matter, or denying it or sweeping it under the rug. It's neither one of those things. The goal, I think, is to own the imperfection, and ask God to meet us in it. No matter what the kind of imperfection we're talking about, if we can be honest about it and say, yeah, I really messed up, or this is really wrong, or I'm struggling with this box that I'm finding myself in right now. If we can just talk to the Lord about it and say, God, what do you have for me in this? Sometimes it might be confession. Sometimes it might be trusting him more and saying, okay, take this and work with it in spite of me. So, if we can start to do that, I think there are some real benefits that we experience as a church. If we can start to own our imperfection collectively and individually, here's the things. First of all, God gets the glory for anything good, because we're no longer assuming that what's happening is due to the fact that we've somehow gotten it right. When we first planted our church, I think I kind of went into it with the idea. This was not this church. This is our church that we were planting. I kind of went into it with the idea, somehow thinking that we were going to do it a little more right, and it was going to have, I think that's just in church planter mentality, that we're going to do this thing and it's going to be a little bit better, and that's going to have more effect for God because we've really dialed it in here. We pretty quickly learned that it was still just a bunch of people who were, the same people they were over here, they're the same people here now, just trying to do it. And so to go, yeah, when you can start to own that imperfection, then whatever good happens, that's due to God. Paul wrote in his first letter to the Corinthians, he said something along these lines. He says, "Take a good look, friends, at who you were when you got called into this life. I don't see many of the brightest and the best among you." Thanks, Paul. Thanks a lot. Not many influential, not many from high society families. Isn't it obvious that God deliberately chose men and women that the culture overlooks and exploits and abuses, chose these nobodies to expose the hollow pretensions of the somebodies? That makes it quite clear that none of you can get by with blowing your own horn before God. Everything that we have, right thinking, right living, a clean slate, and a fresh start, it comes from God by way of Jesus Christ. So God gets the glory for all of it when we can really come to terms with our own imperfections. Another thing about that is that we see God's strength actually show up in that weakness, in that imperfection, in a way that we may not have expected. It's Paul talking about how when he had that thorn in the flesh that would not go away, God showed up in that. And there are ways that we see God that only begin to emerge when we can acknowledge that weakness. There's a story about jars of clay in the Old Testament. Some of you might remember the story of Gideon. Gideon, who, he self-described himself as coming from the smallest tribe in Israel and being like the least important person in his family. He was not a big name person. He's one of those nobodies that we just read about. Like he didn't have something really special going on for him about this, that why God chose him. And he has this big army of 10,000 some people, and God whittles it down till all he has left is 300 people. 300 people in his army to go up against the Midianites that we're told in Scripture, their camp in this valley, they were like locusts. They were just so many of them. There were countless numbers of these Midianites. And so what does Gideon do? He takes these 300 men, and he gives them each a trumpet, and then he gives them each a jar of clay. And there's 300. The rest of them are off the screen up there. But, yeah. So, but in each jar is a torch. And he has them go and stand on the mountains all around this valley. And when Gideon blows his trumpet, what do? They break their jars, they smash them, and then all of a sudden the light becomes visible, and they see, and the Midianites panic. And they basically fight the fight themselves, and Gideon hardly has to do anything. It is the Lord who uses this. But here's the thing, those jars, their main function here was to break so that the light could be seen. And sometimes a clay jar's best feature is how easily it breaks, right? Right? Like, are we willing to set down some of our guardedness, some of our defensiveness against really acknowledging what's going on inside us? Can we let that go? Because it's when we can break, which is what we don't want to do, that's where God begins to show up. I really like what Frank Lake said. He said, God works well with near broken or broken people whose defensive delusions about themselves are already on the way out. How about that one? That's pretty good. I think that getting to brokenness is a real key for seeing God show up. What does it look like for us to do that as a community and not just individually? All right, so another benefit that I see is that our sense of identity and worth shifts. It moves away. When we're working towards being perfect, we're seeing our accomplishments as being the center of what makes us valuable. We're seeing what we do as being the thing that gives us any sense of worth. Some of you may be familiar with the name Henry Nouwen. He's a pretty famous author. He's passed away now. But he was an academic, and he taught in Ivy League schools. And then there was something going on for him that he felt like he needed something different, radically different. And so he went and moved into this community in Toronto called Daybreak that was a community for mentally disabled people, just to live in and among them. And this is one of his books called In the Name of Jesus. And this is what he wrote about that experience. He said, "The first thing that struck me when I came to live in a house with mentally handicapped people was that their liking or disliking me had absolutely nothing to do with many of the useful things I had done until then. Since nobody could read my books, they could not impress anyone. And since most of them never went to school, my 20 years at Notre Dame, Yale, and Harvard did not provide a significant introduction. Not being able to use any of the skills that had proved so practical in the past was a real source of anxiety. I was suddenly faced with my naked self, open for affirmations and rejections, hugs and punches, smiles and tears, all dependent simply on how I was perceived at the moment. This experience was and is in many ways still the most important experience of my new life because it forced me to rediscover my true identity." And then he talks about this community. He says, "These broken, wounded, and completely unpretentious people forced me to let go of my relevant self, the self that can do things, show things, prove things, build things, and forced me to reclaim that unadorned self in which I am completely vulnerable, open to receive and give love regardless of my accomplishments." And then he said this, which I thought was really amazing. He said, "I am deeply convinced that the Christian leader of the future is called to be completely irrelevant and to stand in this world with nothing to offer but his or her own vulnerable self." Amen? Yeah, that is a hard thing to do, though, to let go of these other things that we find our value in. But as we begin to do that, as we can live into our imperfections and accept them, then all of a sudden we can have more space for other people who are also flawed, and it makes for a more loving, gracious environment. I got to tell you one story of years and years ago in our church. There was a man who was... He and his wife were actually leading a marriage small group, and he got up one Sunday morning and just began to really kind of chastise the men and was just so judgmental or saying they needed to really, do better in their marriages and all of this. Well, come to find out afterwards, the guy was having an affair at the time. And there was such a disconnect because he could not own his own imperfection that had to be projected then onto other people. And there was no room for grace for other people because he didn't have it for himself. So that sense of really staying close to my own flaws, my own limitations, my own needs, helps me be better community with other people, right? Because we want to make room for other people. So one last thing that I see as a benefit here is that when we can own our imperfection, we embody the very nature of the gospel. As I said before, Jesus came and took on those limitations. He stepped into humanity, and this is that upside down thinking of God where salvation itself comes in the way of a death. And it looks completely backward. So when we can actually begin to sit with our weaknesses and our imperfections, it pictures for people Christ himself. Our very own Mason Florence from Anchor Lakewood. He said, Jesus is the ultimate broken vessel. He's the ultimate jar of clay that has been broken wide open for us, and God's glory showed up there. And if we are his followers, if we are pursuing him, what better way to do that than to step into that model and allow ourselves to be broken before him. We're coming soon here to the Lord's Supper this morning, and I just want to put these little boxes that are imperfect boxes up there before you to just have you think about what is for you an imperfection that you are grappling with right now in yourself. Maybe you know there's something that needs to get out and be confessed. Maybe you're carrying a lot of shame and guilt, and you can barely think of it. You can barely address it. Here's what I want to say. Scripture tells us that Jesus, when he went to the cross, he actually became sin. He became our imperfection. He took that all on himself. And so he carries our iniquities. You can bring that to him. You can bring whatever it is, confess it to him. He's ready to take that from you without condemnation. And it says also that he scorned the shame of the cross. He took the power out of shame. If you're carrying a lot of shame right now, Jesus can take the power of that away. If you go to him with it, he's ready for that. But maybe you're dealing with a kind of imperfection that you just haven't been able to accept. Maybe there's a new limitation in your life that has felt like something that is just something you've resisted, or that God is restraining you in some way. What would it look like for you to say, God, I'm stuck here. I can't move. Jesus was limited, nailed to that cross in a place of no movement. He understands limitations. He invited Thomas to put his hand in his scar. You know, if you are feeling scarred and damaged, Christ invites you to come close to his scars and let him do some healing in your life. And maybe you're in process and it's just frustrating to you. Or maybe other people are frustrating you by their slow process. Christ makes all the room for us to go at our own pace because he became a baby and walked through life. So as you come this morning, as you come to receive from his hand, hear him saying, this is for you. This body of mine that was limited, this body of mine that was broken, that was made imperfect, it's for you. I'm offering it to you. This blood that was spilt, this blood that left the scars on me, I'm offering it to you. Come take it. Take it. Say, yes, Lord, I need it. Apply it to my own imperfections today. And if you are needing additional prayer, the prayer team will be at the back. I'll be at the back as well. We would love to pray with you this morning. But let's just take a moment to have some quiet reflection before the Lord, and then come and receive from him when you're ready.